My name is Sarah Albright, and the day that changed everything happened on the 12th of March 2017. Before I tell you what I experienced, I want you to understand the life I came from. A life wrapped tightly in rules, fear, and the kind of faith that doesn't tolerate questions. I was raised in a very strict Muslim family in a small town in northern Jordan. From the moment I was little, my days were filled with memorizing verses from the Quran, praying 5 times a day, and never stepping out of line. My family believed deeply in their traditions, and the thought of anything different was dangerous, even shameful. But deep inside me, there was a restlessness, a quiet voice I couldn't explain, and it grew louder as the years went on. Then one night, everything changed in a way I never thought possible. I had a dream, a vision really, of a man dressed all in white standing in the middle of the desert. His presence was calm but powerful, like a peace you could feel in your bones. He looked right at me and said words I would never forget. "I am the way, the truth, and the life." I woke up with my heart pounding, tears streaming down my face. I didn't understand what it meant then, but I knew it was real. I prayed quietly, almost in secret, whispering the name Jesus, not sure if I was even allowed to say it out loud. That moment was the beginning of a journey that would nearly cost me my life. From that night on, I started reading, secret readings, hidden from everyone, of a book I found called the Gospel. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard or felt before. The more I read, the more I was drawn to Jesus, the man from my dream. But in my family, faith was not something to be chosen. It was imposed. When they discovered my secret, the consequences were immediate and brutal. My father's face turned dark with fury. They beat me, locked me away in a small, cold room beneath the house, and whispered of forcing me into marriage with a man I had never met, all to correct my heart. I remember sitting in that dark basement, the weight of the chains both on my wrists and on my soul. I was terrified, but I refused to give up the new hope I had found. The more they tried to break me, the stronger my faith became. One night, they brought a man to perform what they called an exorcism. He spoke in harsh tones, demanding I renounce Jesus and return to the right path. But I stood silently, trembling but resolute, knowing that this man in white was with me, even if I couldn't see him. The prayer I whispered in that cold, lonely place was the only light I had. Eventually, I knew I couldn't stay. My escape was desperate, crossing miles of burning desert under a scorching sun, with no one to trust but the voice in my heart and the faith that kept me moving forward. The journey to freedom was filled with danger and loneliness. I traveled through harsh landscapes, hidden from everyone, afraid of being caught and returned to a life I was running from. There were moments I nearly gave up, nights where the cold seemed to seep into my bones, and days when the hunger and thirst overwhelmed my body. But through every step, the man in white remained with me. I would close my eyes and hear his words. "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Those words became my anchor when everything else felt like it was falling apart. When I finally reached safety, I was a different person. Bruised, broken, but alive in a way I had never been before. My faith, once a secret whispered in fear, had become a roaring flame inside me. It was a faith tested by fire, forged in the darkest valleys, and carried through by a love I could never explain. This is my story, a story of fear, pain, betrayal, but ultimately, hope and salvation. I share it with you now so that you might know how powerful and real the love of Jesus is, even in the places where following him can mean death. Even after I escaped, the scars of my past followed me. My family disowned me, and many nights I lay awake wondering if I had made the right choice, if the price I paid was worth it. I was alone in a new country, with no home, no family, and only my faith to hold on to. There were moments when the loneliness pressed down so heavily that it felt like I was drowning in silence. But in those darkest hours, I felt a presence beside me. The same man from my dream, guiding me, whispering hope into my heart. He showed me visions of light and peace, places I never thought I could reach. Slowly, I started to heal. I met others who shared my faith, who held me up when I was weak and reminded me that I was not alone. My faith gave me strength to face each new day, even when the memories of my past haunted me. The journey wasn't easy, and it still isn't. But every step I take is a step of faith, a step away from fear and toward the promise of a new life. This story isn't just about me. It's about anyone who has ever felt lost, broken, or afraid. It's about the power of faith to change everything, even when the world around you is dark and unforgiving. Looking back, I realized that dream was more than just a vision. It was a calling. Jesus wasn't just a figure in white. He was my lifeline, the reason I am still here today. The message he gave me is simple but powerful. No matter how dark your path, no matter how alone you feel, there is a way to the light, the truth, and the life that never ends. My hope in sharing this is that anyone watching who feels trapped or hopeless will find courage. You are not alone. There is a love so strong it can carry you through the darkest nights and bring you into the dawn. My story is far from over, and I know there are many battles still ahead, but I walk forward with the promise that I will never walk alone. If you are struggling, if you are searching, remember his words. They carried me through, and they can carry you too. There's something about living through a nightmare and coming out on the other side that changes you in ways you don't always understand right away. When I was still trapped in that basement, when the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly around me, I remember thinking that this was the end, that my life was finished before it really even began. The isolation was suffocating, like being buried alive in a tomb of silence and fear. I could hear my family moving about the house above me, their voices low and angry, but down there, it was just me and my thoughts, and the quiet, steady presence of the man from my dream. I can't explain how I knew he was there. It wasn't like a flash of light or a voice booming through the walls. It was a calm certainty, a warmth that filled the cold air around me and settled deep into my heart. Every time the fear rose, every time I felt like breaking, I clung to that feeling, whispering the name Jesus over and over like it was a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. The physical pain faded sometimes, but the ache in my soul never did, except when I reached out in prayer and felt that impossible peace wash over me. I was alone, but I was never truly alone. I remember the night of the exorcism vividly. Even now, my hands tremble when I think about it. They brought a man who called himself a religious leader, someone who claimed he could cast out the evil spirits that supposedly possessed me. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering candle, the walls closing in like a trap. He shouted at me, demanding I renounce Jesus, threatening me with curses and punishments from God if I didn't obey. His voice was harsh, but in the midst of his rage, I felt something else, a presence far stronger than his fury. The man in white, the one who had spoken to me in the desert, was there. I couldn't see him with my eyes, but I felt his hand on my shoulder, steadying me, giving me strength to stand silently against the storm of words. I whispered a prayer from the depths of my being, a prayer that felt like a sword cutting through the darkness. It was the only weapon I had, but it was enough. The man faltered, his anger slipping into confusion, and eventually, they left me alone. That night, I realized that my faith was not just a fragile hope but a powerful shield, stronger than anything my captors could throw at me. After I escaped, the world outside was nothing like the life I had known. The desert was vast and unforgiving, but it was also free. The sun burned down on me during the day, and the cold bit at my skin at night. I traveled without maps, without anyone to guide me, only the voice in my heart pushing me forward. I had to rely on strangers' kindness and my own instincts, both of which felt like miracles when they came. There were times when hunger clawed at me, when exhaustion nearly pulled me to the ground, and when fear whispered that I should give up and turn back. But the man in white never left me. I would close my eyes and see his face, calm and kind, reminding me that the way was before me, even if I couldn't see it. Each step I took was an act of faith, a declaration that my life was no longer owned by fear or by the chains that once held me. When I finally reached a safe place, my body was battered, and my spirit was raw, but my heart was bursting with a light I had never known. That light was the love of Jesus, the love that had carried me through every nightmare and brought me back to life. The days after my escape were a strange mix of hope and pain. I was free, yes, but freedom came with its own battles. I was alone in a new country, surrounded by people who didn't understand my story or my faith. Every day was a struggle to rebuild what had been shattered, to find peace in the chaos of a world that seemed so different from the one I had left behind. I faced loneliness that was deeper than any prison, nights filled with tears and prayers for strength. But in those moments of despair, the man in white appeared again. Not in dreams this time, but in the kindness of strangers, in the gentle words of new friends, in the quiet moments when I felt a peace that surpassed understanding. My faith became my anchor, pulling me through storms of doubt and fear. I learned that salvation wasn't just about surviving a nightmare. It was about walking forward with hope, even when the future was uncertain and the past haunted me. My scars remind me of the price I paid, but they also tell the story of a love that never abandoned me. This is what it means to follow Jesus, to walk through the fire and come out burning bright. Let me tell you, the cost of this faith is real. I lost my family. They cut me off like I was a stranger, a betrayal that cut deeper than any wound. Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if I had stayed silent, if I had hidden my faith away and lived the life they wanted for me. But then I remember the man in white, his words echoing through my soul. I am the way, the truth, and the life. That promise was worth more than any earthly comfort or approval. It gave me courage to face rejection, to walk alone, and to keep moving forward. I share my story because I want others to know that even in the darkest places, there is a light that can never be extinguished. If you are watching this and feel trapped by fear, pain, or loneliness, know that there is hope. The same love that carried me through can carry you too. Don't give up, don't lose faith, because your story isn't finished yet. Keep holding on, keep praying, and believe that you are not alone. There are moments from those early days after my escape that still come back to me with sharp clarity, as if the pain and fear were happening all over again. When I first arrived in the foreign country that had promised refuge, I felt like a ghost wandering through crowds of people who didn't know my name or my story. I remember standing in the airport, clutching a small bag with the few belongings I had managed to take with me, and feeling an overwhelming sense of both relief and terror. Relief because I was no longer trapped under my family's roof, no longer locked away in that basement with nothing but shadows for company. Terror because I had no idea what came next. I didn't speak the language well, I didn't have a home, and I certainly didn't have a plan. But deep inside, that quiet voice that had guided me through the desert was still there, whispering courage into my heart. I repeated the words I had come to hold as my lifeline. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Those words became my armor as I stepped into the unknown. The first weeks were the hardest. Everything was unfamiliar, from the strange sounds on the street to the different smells of food. I struggled to communicate, to find a place to sleep, and to understand the strange customs that surrounded me. There were nights when I sat alone in my tiny room, tears falling silently, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. But I also found little moments of grace, like the kind lady at the grocery store who smiled at me even though I couldn't understand her, or the quiet man at the bus stop who offered me a bottle of water when I looked exhausted. Those small acts of kindness were like little rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds. They reminded me that even in the midst of fear and uncertainty, God was still working, still sending light into my darkness. I clung to those moments, knowing they were proof that I was not forgotten, that my story was far from over. Slowly, I began to build a new life. I found a small community of believers who welcomed me like family, people who shared my faith and understood the price I had paid for it. They taught me how to read the Bible in my new language, helped me practice speaking, and offered prayers when my heart felt too heavy to carry on. It wasn't easy. There were days when loneliness and doubt threatened to swallow me whole, but each day I woke up determined to keep moving forward, to hold on to the faith that had saved me. I worked hard to find a job to support myself, to build a place where I could finally breathe without fear. And as I did, I began to understand something powerful. Faith is not just about holding on during the storm, it's about learning to dance in the rain. Even when everything seemed against me, I found joy in small victories. A kind word, a shared smile, a quiet moment of prayer. Those little pieces of light became the foundation of my new life. Looking back, I realized that my journey was about more than just escape or survival. It was about transformation. The girl who once memorized the Quran in fear and silence was now a woman who could openly declare her faith in Jesus. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. But living came with its own challenges. There were still times when nightmares from my past would wake me in the middle of the night, when the scars on my body and soul ached with the weight of what I had endured. There were moments when I doubted whether I deserved the peace I had found, or whether God could truly forgive someone like me for everything I had been through. But every time those dark thoughts came, I found myself reaching for the Bible, for the prayers that had carried me through the darkest valleys. I found comfort in the words of Jesus, who promised rest for the weary and strength for the broken-hearted. And slowly, I learned to forgive. Not just those who had hurt me, but myself. Forgiveness became the final step in my healing, the key to unlocking the future God had planned for me. My story is not just about suffering or escape. It's about hope, about the power of faith to change lives even in the most impossible situations. It's about a love that meets us in our darkest moments and refuses to let go. When I think about that man in white from my dream, I realize he was showing me something more than just a way out. He was showing me a way forward. A way to live with courage, with purpose, with joy. Even now, years later, I carry that dream with me, that promise that no matter what happens, I am never alone. I share this story with you not because I want sympathy or pity, but because I want you to know that miracles are real. That love is real. That God's light can break through the darkest night and lead you into a new dawn. If you are watching this and struggling with your own battles, know that there is a path forward. There is hope. There is a God who loves you more than you can imagine and is waiting to meet you right where you are. Hold on to that hope. Let it carry you through. Whenever you feel lost, remember that the man in white is waiting to meet you too. And if you believe, your life can be transformed just like mine was. I want to take you back to one of the most terrifying moments in my journey. The moment when my family discovered I had secretly started reading the gospel. It was a simple act in many ways, just flipping through pages, trying to understand words that gave me hope, but to them, it was a betrayal worse than anything else. One evening, as I sat quietly in my small room, clutching the worn pages of my Bible, I heard the heavy footsteps of my brother approaching. His face was dark with anger, eyes burning with something I couldn't yet name. They had always been strict, but that night their strictness turned into something else, something violent. They accused me of abandoning my faith, of being possessed by evil spirits. The punishments that followed were brutal. Beatings that left bruises on my skin and pain that seeped into my bones. I was locked away in a tiny room with no windows, barely enough space to sit or lie down, the air thick with the scent of damp walls and despair. They wanted to break me, to force me back into submission, but no matter what they did, my heart held onto the man in white. I whispered prayers beneath my breath, prayers for strength, for freedom, for the courage to keep going. Those prayers became the only thing keeping me alive. Days turned into weeks, and I lost track of time in that dark room. The only light came from the faint cracks around the door and the small candle they sometimes left burning. I prayed constantly, begging Jesus to not leave me alone. I imagined him standing there beside me, his hand reaching out through the darkness, telling me to be strong. I felt his presence more clearly than ever before, even when my body was weak and my spirit nearly broken. One night, when the pain became unbearable, I cried out in the silence, not for myself, but for my family. I prayed for them to see the truth, to find mercy in their hearts, but I also prayed for the strength to walk away if they never did. That night, something changed inside me. A peace settled over my soul, a peace I couldn't explain. It was like a quiet fire burning in the middle of a storm, a promise that no matter what happened, I was held in God's hands. The escape itself felt like a miracle. I didn't plan it, and I wasn't sure how I would do it. But one night, when my family was distracted, I found a small window left unlocked. The cool desert air hit my face as I slipped outside, heart pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. The desert was vast and empty, But it was freedom. Freedom I had only dreamed of before. I walked for hours, the stars above guiding me through the darkness. My feet bled, my throat was dry, but I kept going because I believed the man in white was leading me. Sometimes I would stop and pray, asking for strength and protection. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that every step away from my old life was a step toward the new life Jesus had promised me. The desert was both beautiful and terrifying, with silence so deep it felt like it could swallow me whole. But in that silence, I heard the strongest voice of all, the voice of hope. When I finally reached the edge of the desert and saw the lights of a city in the distance, I knew I had made it. I was alive. Even after reaching safety, the scars of my past were not easy to erase. I had nightmares for months, waking up in cold sweats, reliving the fear and pain of captivity. Trust was hard for me. Every new person felt like a potential threat. But I found solace in a small church where people welcomed me with open arms, never asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. They prayed with me, helped me learn English, and offered me a sense of family I had never known. The pastor's wife became like a second mother, encouraging me when the weight of my past threatened to pull me under. It was in those quiet moments of fellowship that I truly began to heal. My faith grew deeper, not just in the man who appeared in my dreams, but in the real, living God who met me in my brokenness and gave me new life. I started sharing my story in whispers at first, then louder and clearer, knowing that my pain could become a beacon for others trapped in darkness. This was no longer just my journey. It was a testimony of God's power to redeem, restore, and renew. Through all of this, I never forgot the man in white and his words. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Those words echoed in my heart through every trial and every triumph. They became a song of hope, a promise that even when the world seemed dark and unforgiving, there was a way forward, a way filled with love, grace, and new beginnings. Today, I live with the scars of my past, but I also carry the joy of my salvation. My faith is not just a story I tell. It's the foundation of who I am. I share it with you because I want you to know that no matter what chains bind you, no matter how deep the darkness feels, God's light can break through. If you are struggling, if you are lost, or if you simply need hope, reach out to Him. His love is stronger than anything you face. Hold on to that truth, and never let go. There were times in the months that followed my escape when I questioned everything. My faith, my decisions, and even my own identity. Being free didn't erase the years of pain and fear that had shaped me. In fact, sometimes the loneliness felt even worse than the captivity because it was filled with the weight of the unknown. I found myself sitting alone in small, unfamiliar rooms, wondering if I had made the right choice. What if my family was right? What if I had turned away from the only life I knew? But every time those thoughts crept in, I remembered the man in white from my dream. His calm voice, his steady presence. It was as if he was reminding me that my life was not just about survival, but about purpose. That even in the darkest valleys, I was being led by a light I could trust. It was this hope that kept me going through the days when my heart was heavy and my spirit felt fragile. As I began to rebuild my life piece by piece, I found that healing was not a straight path. There were setbacks. Moments when the trauma of my past flooded back in waves, when I felt overwhelmed by grief and fear. But alongside those struggles, I discovered strength I didn't know I had. I met other women who had been through similar journeys, and their stories became a source of encouragement. We shared tears, prayers, and dreams of freedom together. In their company, I realized I wasn't alone. The church community that had welcomed me so warmly became a family that wrapped me in love and support. Their prayers lifted me when I felt weak, and their laughter reminded me that joy could still exist even after heartbreak. It was in this space of grace and acceptance that I learned to forgive. Not only my family but also myself. Forgiveness was not easy, but it was necessary. It freed me from the chains of bitterness and allowed me to embrace the new life God had given me. One of the most profound changes I experienced was in my understanding of what it means to truly follow Jesus. Before my dream and my escape, faith had been something I knew only through rules and fear. But now, it became something alive and personal. A relationship with someone who knew me completely and loved me unconditionally. I felt his presence in everyday moments. In the warmth of sunlight on my face, in the kindness of strangers, in the quiet stillness of prayer. Each day, I grew more certain that my journey was part of a larger story, a story of redemption that included not just me, but countless others who were searching for hope in a broken world. Sharing my testimony became a mission, a way to shine light into dark places and remind others that they are not forgotten. I began speaking at gatherings, telling my story in the hopes that it might give courage to someone else trapped in fear or despair. It was terrifying at first, but with each telling, I felt a peace that surpassed understanding, a confirmation that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Despite all the challenges and pain, I came to understand that my journey was not just about escaping physical captivity but about breaking free from the chains of fear and doubt that had held me captive for so long. I learned to embrace the fullness of life Jesus promised. Not a life without struggle, but a life filled with His presence and peace. The man in white who appeared in my dream was more than a vision. He was a promise that the way forward was possible, even when it seemed impossible. I want anyone listening to know that no matter where you are right now, whether you feel lost, broken, or afraid, there is a love that will never let you go. That love is Jesus. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And if you let Him in, He will lead you through your darkest moments into the light. So hold on to hope, hold on to faith, and keep moving forward. Your story is not finished yet. If this story has touched your heart, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need hope today. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful testimonies, and leave a comment if you want to share your own story or ask questions. Remember, you are never alone, and miracles are still happening every day. Thank you for listening, and may God bless you on your journey.